Doddington was a hill farm in Northumberland near to Wooler, which we bought in early 2016 in the belief that we could create England's largest private sector woodland planted for 30 years.
When you're looking for suitable land, exactly what criteria are you trying to fulfil?
Well, value is obviously important, as we were buying the land with an investor and we needed to show an increase in land value by planting. The reason we chose Doddington was because it already was showing a degradation of land that the ELS was designed to support. So across the hillground, which was designated as a priority habitat, gorse, bracken and rhododendron had encroached to such an extent that it was threatening the priority habitat that the ELS was trying to preserve. Also across the land were thousands of birch and Scots pine, and it was this invasion of trees that persuaded us that the best use of the land in future should be forestry. We have an enormous demand for timber in the UK. We're the second largest importer of timber in the world after China, and we have a great climate for growing trees. Primarily, we came into this work on the back of operating Pennine biomass. We are managing woodland, and we knew that we wanted to increase the amount of woodland cover that we were managing. It seemed the right thing to do at the time to go out and buy land, low value land, to plant for forestry.
How secure do you think the future market for timber is?
We know that there is going to be a shortage of timber in the UK around 2025, 2030. Forestry Commission reports have suggested that demand at that stage will exceed supply. Obviously, the trees that we plant now at Doddington will not be ready for harvesting in 2025, but it just goes to show the shortage of timber available in the UK at this time.
Engagement with public bodies and with private interest groups seems to be a common theme amongst all of our inspiring investors. Has that been the case with you?
Absolutely, absolutely. We took the public consultation very seriously. From the start, we knew that were going to be problems with planting this site. Half the area was under crow access land, and we needed to engage to make sure the public were going to be able to access the land, the forest in future.
How have you engaged with the people who are fearful about losing their access?
We had interest from local riding groups and local walking groups and even a climbing group who have access to the land as it was as a farm. So we have designed a circular timber track around the site which links into public rights of way. So before they had limited public access across an overgrown site, and in future there's going to be 10 kilometres of well-maintained roads for riding, for bicycling and for walking.
I heard a rumour that Pennine Forestry took a stand at the Wooler show. Why did you do that?
That was very much part of the first public engagement. We didn't know how the public would react to the planting of this new large woodland. So we designed, in a very basic level, our initial concept of the scheme, put it on a large plan, took a stand at the Wooler show and displayed this map for everyone to see and said, come and talk to us. It was amazing how much interest we had. There was a fair amount of negative press, there was a lot of public interest, and those conversations really determined how the plan looked as we presented it to the Forestry Commission and Natural England.
And what about your engagement with the Forestry Commission and with Natural England?
The main challenge was to get the Forestry Commission and Natural England to agree with the interested pressure groups to a common objective for the woodland. We had to create a biodiversity action plan for species and for habitats. So, for example, we had to work out whether to prioritise an increased buffer zone for red squirrels over the existing habitats on site. We had to agree how to plant a riparian woodland for flood alleviation on a tributary to the River Till. We had to agree how to control the invasive species such as bracken and rhododendron.
Planting 350 hectares of forestry seems like quite a massive project. How do you go about it?
It wouldn't seem such a big project in Scotland, where they're planting 15,000 hectares of new forestry every year. Our plan is to spend 3 years planting it, 3 planting seasons. We've just started. We planted 25 hectares this year, mainly on the lower ground, the easier access ground, planted predominantly Sitka spruce in that area. Over the next 2 planting seasons, we will be planting 150 hectares each year.
Presumably you bring in subcontractors.
This is going to provide significant local employment. A local contractor will be building the 5 kilometres of new timber tracks and access roads. We have several teams of contractors planting the ground and a local fencing operator to build the deer fencing. There are subcontracted groups of planters from southern Scotland and northern England who've tendered for the work, and we will be working with 3 or 4 of these groups over the next 2 years to get the trees in the ground. Growing up at Barningham, I realise the importance of managing the ground for habitat, particularly bird species. So I'm very sensitive towards the correct management of land to protect those species. So for example, we have a blackcock lek here at Barningham. It would be unsuitable to plant Sitka or commercial forestry alongside a blackcock plantation. But we are able to design a woodland that is suitable for habitat for blackcock, that doesn't have a detrimental effect on the blackcock population and the other birds such as golden plover and peewit and curlew. One of the great successes of the Doddington project is that we've been able to persuade Natural England and the Forestry Commission and the other interested groups to plant a mixed productive woodland. So we have a commercial crop of roughly 40% Sitka, we have 35% native broadleaves, and the balance being open ground and managed priority habitats. And this, I think, is the future for forestry, particularly on designated land.
Could you enlarge a bit on the balance between the interests of your investors and the interests of Pennine Forestry?
We work with a very small number of investors, and each of those investors has their own differing investment purposes. Some like investing in commercial plantations, others have biodiversity interests. We choose sites that are specifically of interest to specific investors. Pennine Forestry's interest comes in a profit share, effectively, of the increase in value of the land. These can be 10, 15, 20-year arrangements whereby we go through the process of afforestation. The financial obligations are met by the investor, as is the land purchase, and we create the plan and implement it. After 10 or 15 or 20 years, we will sell our stake in the project and the investor will buy us out.
How do you think that some of your ideas about afforestation could be rolled out for land managers with smaller holdings?
I suspect Barningham is a good example of this as well. We have patchy areas of forestry in small blocks across the estate. And I think that's typical for many farmers and landowners around England. These pieces of forestry were probably planted as shelter belts or a following of a grant in the 60s and 70s. They are difficult to manage, they're very inaccessible, the fences are falling down, and they are often forgotten about as part of the estate makeup. For us at Barningham, we are now increasing our forestry cover, and in doing so we are absorbing some of these smaller blocks to make the whole forest, including these smaller outcrops, more manageable, more accessible and more profitable. Based on my experience, the 3 most important elements of a successful forestry operation are scale, access and management. The least interesting piece of forestry is the small, unmanaged, inaccessible woodland.
The history of tree planting in England for the last 50 years has been pretty woeful. What do you recommend that we do about that?
Yes, but let's face it, the UK is in a bit of a pickle about its forestry. We all know the benefits from woodlands and forestry, and yet England has only 10% forestry cover. The target for the country is to increase that to 12% by 2060. I think this is a challenge that the CLA should take on.
What inspires you to push this project forwards?
It does help that I work in an industry that I find inspiring. Who's not inspired by looking at a champion tree? But it is also a business and it makes money, and that inspires me.
How about the future? What does success look like?
Success for me would be an increase in forestry cover in the UK. The future of our business very much depends on the success of the environmental land management scheme. We are very encouraged by the fact that forestry and woodland will be one of the land options within that scheme. And if you take the premise that public money is available for public good, forestry and woodland provides more public good than many other land uses, and so should attract more money than other land uses.